Hey guys, this is JC, and I am here with Jen from Respawn. How are you doing today?
Doing well, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So we were talking about tutorials and how games are developing faster into this team-based era. So why don't we start off with talking about what you do at Respawn, and then we'll get into the tutorials topic.
Yeah, I'm Jen. I'm a build engineer at Respawn on the Apex team. I work more on the back end development. Just for reference, you play on a build, so we just do a lot of pipelining automation to make the game playable for our internal teams and also to give that product to our players.
Yeah. So, what is it like that you do specifically within that? Like, are you making sure, like, optimizing what they give you, or
Yeah, it's basically putting all the pieces to the game together and making it playable at the end of the day, and making each and every build authentic and unique and also um, like playable at the end of the day. If it fails, we can't really do much with it. And so I typically optimize that build pipeline, make it as quick as possible, but also try to get the build to succeed 100% of the time. And yeah, just making our pipeline just efficient and quick.
okay, that's awesome. So, I guess speaking of like efficiency and quickness, one of the things that I've noticed about gaming, at least of recent, is they've become like more team based. Like you have obviously Apex, it's a squad based, which is a team. You've got Valorant, CS:GO, League of Legends, Rocket League. We've got all these games that are very team based, and I went through and I played a lot of these games for the first time. Uh, and like the tutorials are just like, cool. I know how to move my character now, but now I have this thing called teammates, and I don't know what to do with them. Uh, and so that's where my kind of thought process was looking back at game development. If you go back and play, like I'm kind of going back and playing Final Fantasy 12 uh, for the first time in a long time, and like they're still teaching you things in the game, like 2 to 3 hours into it, and that's
Right.
not something that I see with, uh, I guess you'd say like these more competitive games where it's okay, you know how to move your character, good luck. And I've noticed that causes a lot of frustration with everybody because everybody's like, oh, I think I know how to play the game because I played the tutorial. Or if somebody gives feedback, they're like, oh, you're wrong. Or if they do listen to the feedback, it may not be good feedback. And so they develop a bad habit. Uh,
Right.
and so that's where my thought came in, specifically as a coach, is what could we do to help teach the players to play their characters and play the game within that team context that is ultimately the game.
Yeah. I would say like the tough thing about like when it comes to tutorials is when you do launch a game, it's like it puts you right into the tutorial. It's not like you can like invite your friends and do it together. And so like that tutorial phase is kind of like more like a one-on-one kind of thing, like just the game teaching you how to just play the game enough to like cue into, a match or a game. And so I would say it's really tough when it comes to like the tutorials, making it like kind of present those team-based mechanics and decision making. I think right now, one thing that Apex does is we have our firing range that you're able to join with teammates and play around with all the guns, use the abilities together, and go against, the dummies that we have in there. And so something like that is always available, and you can queue with your team to actually gain that like knowledge of team-based I guess decision making. And so um the tutorial phase I think is really hard to teach that just because you're trying to teach them everything from the game mechanics, how to pick up a gun, how to shoot it, your abilities. and it can get really overwhelming, and some people don't even like playing the tutorial and rather just go straight into a game. But having some sort of game, not like a game mode, but just like a space where people can explore and look at everything at their own pace, I think is really, really good. Rocket League kind of has a similar thing with free play, but I don't think they allow it with like team members. But something like that, I think, is really beneficial, and retainability is like a really big thing. And with things like Apex that are changing over time, I think it's really nice to have something like that that's permanent where you can just jump in, look at all the new guns, look at the new legends, and just try things out. When it comes to the tutorial, I think that it would be really hard to implement kind of like the team based learning when it's like a fresh new player.
Yeah, that's where I would agree with you on that point. Like you got to be able to walk before you can run, and so
Right,
this is like
exactly.
this is the idea that I'm pitching to people just to get their feedback on. Is what if, let's say you get to I'm not as familiar with like the ranking system in Apex,
Mhm.
but let's say like you start out in Iron and like the first tutorial you get is like here's how you move your characters and shoot your gun or whatever. And then like once you hit Bronze, it's like okay, like now here's a tutorial on how do you use like what's the main objectives. Like it's like for the different games is like okay, like you got to destroy these towers if you're playing League of Legends, or you've got to take the site and start to break it down into like basically like the three phases of every game. Like there's like an offensive phase, or a neutral phase, an offensive phase, and like a defensive phase that they all kind of cycle through. And just getting them to understand that aspect of okay, there's a neutral phase that you may be in here. There's an offensive phase where like you're engaging, and there's a defensive phase in which you're trying to defend an area. And just
Right.
to introduce that concept that I think is true across any competitive game. And then maybe once they get to silver, maybe have like character guides of just like, okay, now here's how you use your character within that team context, or like an idea of it.
Mhm.
Uh, so that way it's not hitting them all at once, but giving them that progressive update of this is what your character's good at. So that way they have at least some context of when they pick up the character, instead of having to leave the game to find some YouTube video or whatever.
Right.
There's something in the game, like you guys design these characters to be able to do certain things. Having something from the devs that's like, this character's good at smokes, or this character's good at healing, or whatever. Uh,
Right.
and then
Yeah,
maybe
give
as
them
it
more
starts to get up.
direction.
Yeah. Because that way they can kind of explore the game. It's like whenever they pick up a character, especially as agents and stuff expand,
Mhm. Yeah.
how, if I jump into League of Legends right now, I'm not going to know what any of these characters are, or what they're good
Yeah.
at, or what they're, let alone the rest of the game. So,
Right.
what,
Yeah, I would say it's the exact same way in Apex, where a year from now, like there's going to be very different legends involved, and people will see that and not want to play sometimes.
mhm. So what is it that you think that, because also, I guess on the cost factor too, like designing a tutorial for every character,
Mhm.
there, that's an extensive task in and of
Right.
itself, let alone making that tutorial fun. Uh,
Yeah, exactly. And I would also say like it can hit people very different. Like some people are just very competitive, and the way that like a tutorial shows them how to do it might not be the way they like want to use that like
mhm.
utility. And some people are just casual and just like, you know what, I'm just gonna learn as I go. And so it's really hard when you have different gamer mentalities.
Yeah. So what would you, if you could design like a perfect tutorial, like how would you do it, like per character? Like what would you say is like the defining things that you would look for, like when we get to those like more specific things, like assuming this could happen, how would you do,
Yeah.
what would your thought process be, and like where would you start with, obviously just how to move your character would be the first one.
Mhm.
But then like how would you progress the tutorials as players get higher up the ranks?
Um, I mean, that's really tough, honestly. People learn at like different rates, so it's hard to, I guess, like have a specific path. But I mean, obviously, movement is first, and any weapons is very important, especially in like a battle royale like Apex. Like you're not going to get to the end without a weapon. And then I think just like breaking down utilities, ultimates, and kind of showing how it can be used offensively, defensively, that sort of thing. And then when it comes to like the higher gameplay that we see, that's kind of just like macros, and understanding like map rotations and map like zones. And so I mean I would probably maybe show like some sort of map route or something that would be optimal, but with a game like Apex where every game would be different. You're not going to have the same loot every single time. Your characters, your teammates might pick different characters. And so I think just important to just like break it down as like character by character, gun by gun, map by map, that sort of thing. I think is really helpful and applicable once you like work as a team.
Yeah, so that's like we went through I think probably like 4 or 5 different levels, and then like team is like the last thing that we like think
Yeah.
of teaching. And like I think that's the as in depth as these games are getting, both mechanically and strategically.
Hmm.
I know, like with Rocket League specifically right now, it's a very much let me try and 1v3 or 1v2, and then my teammate has to try and 1v2 or 1v3. Like, there's not
Right.
much of a team aspect in ranked, just because there's not any trust in your teammates because of the way the ranking system has gone.
Hmm.
I've done a whole video about that if you guys are interested. But if even if you do have people who are thinking like a team or trying to think like a team, like they're not necessarily going to be on the same page. Like there's different
Right.
philosophies on the game. Some are more or less effective at different ranks. But that's where
Right.
I think like how do we make that jump without it being turned into like every high school has their apex coach and every high school has this, because that's something that traditional sports has, but esports isn't quite gotten to yet. So that's where I'm thinking, what could devs do on their end? Because I think if that happens, like toxicity is going to start to die down, because then it becomes, okay, I see where I messed up in the
Right.
team comp, or it's very obvious to everybody. And there's like even the dev telling you like, hey, like you're a sentinel, you shouldn't run out into sight with zero utility, or
Right.
like dry swing angles without letting your teammate flash for you, or uh, I don't know enough about Apex to give an example, but that's that's where I'm thinking like, how can we bridge that gap between here's how you become a good player into here's how you be a good teammate within the game.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's just it would be hard just because every player is so different, and people aren't the nicest, I would say, online, and so, yeah, I think it's something that needs to definitely, like we would need more, like, data or, like, some sort of investigation on it, but, again, like, on a player basis, like, I feel like that would be very different, but I do agree that if people would just understand how to be a good teammate, you would see less toxicity. Um, but I guess it's just also really hard when you queue with randoms and that you
Hmm.
don't really know. Like some people like, I don't care if I hurt their feelings, I'm never gonna see them again, and that kind of mentality. sometimes ruins gaming, as people are gonna say what they're gonna say, even if it's very hurtful. And so I think as a gaming community, we do have long ways to go when it comes to eliminating toxicity and being a good teammate.
Yeah. So that's what would you say is like the defining characteristic of a good teammate, like across all games? Like,
I mean, I think when it comes to being a good teammate, it really comes down to just like I guess like being on the same page with your team and providing support or being you know, meshing well with your team, I guess I would say.
mhm.
Like when it comes to Apex, like you're with your squad of 3 and one person's off running somewhere else at a different POI. We're not really on the same page there if 2 of your teammates are in one POI and one teammate's on the other POI. And so not really on the same page. And it also comes down to communication. And some people don't like using their mics, and that's kind of how it is. But pinging system is always really good if you don't want to use your mic. But just like being on the same page and just communicating well and just being a teammate in a team-based game. We're not playing solo in a trio kind of situation, and kind of similar in Rocket League where you see people 1v3. Um, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
You're not the only one on the pitch. And just being, I think, just like realizing that you have teammates is like one thing. A lot of players I think are just like, give me the ball, I'll do it. You just kind of sit there and I mean that's not really how a team-based game works. But I think it's a big mental challenge to overcome.
Yeah. And I guess that's the ultimate question is like, what, obviously, that's part of what I do as a coach, or that's the main thing I do as a coach when it comes to like talking with my players and such. But is there anything devs can do to like teach people like this communication? Or do you think like this is just like a cultural gap and it's just showing up in gaming?
I think it's a bit of both. When it comes to like the actual game and trying to provide more for like those, solo people who play with no team, no comms, that sort of thing. Just giving them like a resource in game would be really helpful. Like in Apex, the pinging system saying, there's an enemy here, I'm looting here, there's this gun on the ground, like that really helps just like incorporate like a team dynamic mentality. Um, but the other part is like it really is like a personal thing as well. Like some players are just don't have the patience
Mhm.
or the time to I guess be a good teammate and they would rather kind of do their own thing and don't use the pinion system like others do, and that's kind of where like the disconnect is. um and I think just like the newer generation is just very ruthless
Yeah.
when it comes to gaming, and they see people on the internet, streamers, being mean to their teammates, and they kind of think it's okay, and they bring it into the game, and then it creates a really big, like, toxicity problem, like we mentioned before. And so I think it is like a generational difference as well. It's just like um, people not really aligning with the motive of the game, really.
Hmm.
Like for example, in Apex, the whole purpose is to win the battle royale and be the last one standing, but some people want to just have a lot of kills, and that's kind of like um just like a disconnect with the goal of the game.
Yeah. So do you think like the goal of the game, like it needs to, because obviously like you don't want to tailor the meta too much to where
Right.
like you don't want to make it to where like everybody's playing hide and seek basically, where it's just like everybody has like some form of camo and they're just hoping they chose the right spot and everybody's hiding out, and like, because then you kind of get rid of the battle point part of like the battle
Right.
royale, but you don't want to go so far away from that direction that the more stealthy play style uh, is just impossible to use. Uh,
Hmm.
and so, how do you, as a dev, like, how are you deciding to balance that? And like, is there a point where I guess you'd say like something becomes a tier 0 strategy where if you aren't doing it, like you're just putting yourself at that much of a disadvantage and that's where you step in as a dev? Or what makes you think, or I guess the better question is, uh, at the end of the day, the meta is to a certain extent decided by the devs.
Right.
And so, what goes into making that decision? There's obviously the esports aspect, but you also have a
Right.
casual player base that you have to consider as well.
Right. Yeah. So, like you mentioned, esports is a really big part in seeing how the meta is shifting or how it really is in real time. I mean, we also use data on like our backend stuff and seeing, pick rates for like legends or um like gun, like I guess usability, and how our maps are, um like the rings, like how they end up on each map. And so when it comes to making a change, like we need the data, and we take that very seriously in the sense that we're not going to just like make a change just to make a change. We have to feel like there is a need, and if like the meta is basically kind of too, I guess, static, it kind of prompts us to make those investigations and see, oh, what are the pick rates? Or what makes a legend like a high pick rate? Is it because, their smokes are really nice, or their smokes are too long, or their range with this kind of utility is really useful? And so it really is all about the data, and we make a lot of our decisions based on what we see in the actual player base and the live game.
Yeah, so basically, if I'm guessing if a character is like showing up in every single team composition, like that's when you go, okay, there's a little bit of concern there. Or
Yes, yeah.
well, when does it go from that like concern phase to okay, we've got to do something now?
Um, I think the esports aspect of it is like really, really important. I think in ALGS we saw like the Bangalore, one of our legends who uses her smokes. I think we saw her in like almost all the teams, which is saying something. And then people see that and start playing Bangalore, and so um, we start seeing kind of like an uptick in tick or legend picks, and that kind of prompts us to like, wait, maybe this legend needs a little bit of tuning. Same with our weapons. That kind of conversation started with like, how does the pros use it? Oh, they're using it like this. We're seeing an uptick, and it kind of has like a direct correlation. Um, but it's kind of what you mentioned, like, we're seeing a lot of people just use this legend, esports, casual, um, in our ranked system, and so that kind of gives us at least a direction of, like, we should probably look into what this legend brings to the game.
So, as a viewer of like games, like I much prefer when characters like get buffed
Mhm.
to like grow the power level and like to make it more entertaining, like as a spectacle side of it. But as a coach, uh I hate seeing only buffs because then it's like, okay, well now we've got to worry about this interaction and now this other interaction is now possible, and it just gets infinitely more complex as stuff gets buffed continuously. So how do you know when it's this agent is overpowered, or the things that we thought would check this character just aren't strong enough to check this character?
Um, I think when it comes to Apex, there's like a lot of characters, and if if you kind of see an interaction between like a character and it's like this character is gonna lose the 1v1 like almost 100% of the time because they're just not strong enough to face, this other player. Oh, my dog.
But yeah, to
Yeah,
segue us back in,
yeah, go
buff
ahead.
versus nerfing characters. How do you decide what needs a buff versus uh, somebody needs a nerf?
I think the interaction between the legends themselves or the players is like a big indication of like, well, they're losing their battle like a lot of the time because XYZ. Um, and also because there's so many characters, it's really hard to like even the playing field. And so we tune like the ones that we kind of see are getting higher pick rates to see if like we can kind of shake up the meta. Um, and so it's like one of those things where like there's so much in the game where it's hard to tell if like one little like shift is going to actually make a difference. Because the player base is like gonna find some way to like use their legend to their advantage. And so I think it's a big thing just seeing like how does like one character match up against another character, and like who's at an advantage with their set abilities.
Yeah, so I guess the other side of it too, I guess more so with I guess this is more like on the tactical side of games, like the more like Valorant type of stuff, where
Mhm.
like certain characters should have better interactions against certain characters, uh, or at least in different situations. Like if you're
Right.
trying to run it down Killjoy's site or a Cypher setup site, like if you're just a duelist, like that should be in the advantage of the Sentinel,
Right.
at least to a small degree. Uh, and so, like, that's where like you have that check of okay, if there's a Sentinel on site, like you're going to use an initiator to try and get through that.
Right.
But then the controller is what helps check the initiator, and
Mhm.
then the duelist is what helps check the controller, at least at a very
Right.
basic level. Uh, so I don't know enough about Apex to say like, is there that level of complexity in the characters where like certain character classes are designed to check others, or
Yeah, so we have a class system itself where it's like assault. They're more aggressive, they're given more ammo. That's kind of like their perk. We also have kind of like controller that can like bunker down or have more like a defensive like util and abilities. Or we have kind of like the support player that is, heals, can grab you loot, that sort of thing. And so we do kind of have that. And so like if you do have like two support in one controller or something like that, you're not as well balanced when it comes to like the perks and what you can get out of it. Not to say you can't do it because there's people who run triple controller and that's totally fine. But we try to implement kind of that system where like, you know, these legends do different things and have different perks. You might want to select a legend from each class in order to kind of get more, support and perks out of your team comp. But again, that kind of comes back to like people sometimes are just have that solo mindset, so they're just gonna like insta pick their character, even if it doesn't really make sense to the comp. And yeah, so we've definitely have that sort of implemented, but it's not something that all players, I guess, follow.
Yeah. I guess also when it comes to that, like having something for all these different characters, like you have
Mhm.
Phoenix in Valorant, like that's just the game I know most as of right now.
Right.
Like he's technically a duelist,
Mhm.
but he can support his teammate with his flashes. He can do a little bit of like a controller's job with his molly, and
Right.
then he can do a little bit of like the smokes with his wall. So like he can do a little bit of everything, and so where do you get that line between designing something for a casual player and designing something with more of that complex pro, everybody's like specifically studied, knows all the data about everything, and how do you choose a character's like design philosophy versus like, is this going to be like the pub stomper Reyna, or is this going to be more like Harbor, where it's okay,
Mhm.
you're going to want to have Harbor and he's going to set up like these characters, like Harbor and Sova combo.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, like you mentioned before, like it's hard to cater to like just one audience when it comes to like pro, casual, or just competitive people. And so I'm not really sure what happens on the design side, but just like a lot of our legends, or not a lot, but some of our legends, don't get picked at all for ranked, don't get picked for, the pro scene, but are a really big part of like the casual players. I would say like Octane is one of those players that it's just fun to play as a casual, but pros are never going to use him in a pro scene. And so I'd say it's again really hard when you have such dynamic player base with different perspectives on how they want to play the game. And so I don't think there's any point where we cater one side over the other. We really want to make the legend unique and have its like own character where they are useful in situations, and you know you would want to pick them over something else. And so I think we kind of lean on that more rather than like, should we bring in a more casual player or casual legend to the table? I think it's more so like, how unique is it compared to the other legends?
Yeah. So so you're saying that having a game that's fun is important, and it's not just all about
Yeah.
the competition side of it.
Yes.
Who
Yes.
could have thought that?
Yeah, such a weird
It's,
concept
yeah,
when you play a game.
yeah. For it to be about fun, not necessarily always winning, and
Yeah, no one wants to have fun while playing games. That's what
nah,
we've learned.
nah. Yeah. Well, I think we've done like a really good job of just showing like how complex like designing games are, uh, and like how even with a theoretical like perfect tutorial system in place that teaches you everything, you still have the human element. So I guess thanks for coming on and talking about your experience as a dev, and answering my rambling questions.
Yeah, no worries. It was a great discussion. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I guess. Is there anything that you think that maybe that you did say that you wanted to emphasize, or just something that we didn't uh, talk about that you would like to bring up, that you think is important when thinking about anything we've discussed when it comes to like game design and team compositions or being a teammate, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of want to double down on being toxic in the gaming community is something it's very present. And just to like remind everyone that like we're all human, devs are human, players are human. I wish I could work on this game 24/7, but it's just not possible. And we're trying our best to give the best possible game to our players. And I hope the players also treat their teammates as humans. And at the end of the day, like the game, you close off the game and you have your life outside of the game as well. And so just be less toxic is the
Yeah.
moral of the story here.
Yes, I am sorry to everybody that I have what is saved in Rocket League. Uh,
That's okay. I
yeah.
allow that.
Okay, so Rocket League is allowed to be toxic. We heard it here first.
Okay,
Totally
maybe not
not
that.
totally not misquoting you there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, I think that's a good point. I think maybe now, like with this conversation, yeah, I think maybe that's just something we as creators need to do more of, is really emphasis on the kindness and like the human aspect of it. Because I know
Yeah.
that's something that I definitely still struggle with, like as a competitive person in general. Like I am not, even when I casually play a game, I'm still very competitive in it, and that's just me as a human being, and
Right.
like my thought process on stuff. And so like I can get tilted at stuff, and like sometimes I'm like, maybe I should have been nicer. Okay, could have worded that, better. Uh, but yeah, so that's definitely something that me as a person has to work on. But two, I think also we gotta really just, I think, emphasize that as a community. And maybe, I don't know if there's necessarily a perfect solution to it, but I think if we as the community leaders
Right.
lead, uh, maybe we can start to make some change and set some good examples for people.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of brought this up before, but people watch, streamers and, videos that kind of show that toxicity and they'll latch onto it. And so I definitely agree that leaders or, influencers in general should be aware of their impact.
Yeah, well, awesome. Well, hey, thanks again for coming on. Maybe you'll have to teach me how to play Epic sometime.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, and you're always welcome to join.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, hey, thanks. Thanks again for coming on. And you guys down in the comment section, what'd you learn? What'd you like? What's your thoughts on how to deal with toxicity and tutorials and anything else we talked about? Is there any place where people can follow you?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on Twitter, Jen VAZ. And yeah, if you want to have a chat, feel free to send a DM. And yeah, we can start from there.
Awesome. Well, hey, y'all have a good day.
See ya.